What if one emperor's ambition didn't just conquer lands, but fundamentally rewrote the future of an entire continent? Imagine a power struggle so intense it forged the Holy Roman Empire into something entirely new. This isn't just history. It's the story of how Barbarossa's iron will reshape an empire, and how his legacy still echoes today. Frederick I, known to history as Barbarossa, stands as one of the most commanding figures of medieval Europe. His life and reign embodied the tension between idealism and ambition, faith and power, and unity and fragmentation. The 12th century was an age of shifting loyalties and uncertain authority across the Holy Roman Empire, and it was in this setting that Barbarossa rose from noble birth to imperial glory. His rule marked a defining chapter in European history, where one man's strength seemed capable of shaping the destiny of an entire continent. The image of the red-bearded emperor, proud and relentless, continues to echo through time, both as a symbol of imperial majesty and as a reminder of the limits of human power. To understand Barbarossa's story, it is necessary to look at the world that produced him. The 12th century was marked by division within the Holy Roman Empire. Power was shared and contested among princes, dukes, bishops, and emperors. Authority was fluid, often dependent on alliances, marriages, and the delicate balance between church and state. The empire itself was a vast and uneven patchwork of territories stretching from the North Sea to Italy. It was not a centralized nation, but a complex network of semi-independent realms held together by loyalty to an emperor who was expected to command both respect and fear. When Frederick Barbarossa came to power, he inherited not only the crown but also the challenge of uniting this unstable structure into a coherent and disciplined political body. Born around the early part of the 12th century, Frederick was the son of Frederick II, Duke of Swabia, from the Hohenstaufen dynasty, and Judith of Bavaria, from the Welf family. This union joined two powerful and often rival houses, which would later prove crucial to Frederick's political legitimacy. From a young age, he was exposed to the realities of governance, the culture of knighthood, and the expectations of leadership. His upbringing instilled in him a deep sense of purpose and a belief in the divine right of kingship. He was known for his intelligence, charm, and the commanding presence that would later win him both admiration and loyalty among his peers. When Frederick was elected King of Germany in the mid-12th century, the empire was in turmoil. His predecessor, Conrad III, had struggled to assert control over rebellious princes and to manage the empire's relationship with the papacy. The long-standing conflict between the Church and the empire had left scars that no ruler could easily heal. The papacy claimed authority over the spiritual and, at times, temporal realms, while the emperor viewed himself as the rightful leader appointed by God to govern Christendom. Frederick understood that his reign would have to balance this tension carefully. His charisma and political skill were tested from the moment he took the throne. Frederick's approach to leadership was rooted in the idea of renewal. He sought to restore imperial dignity and order through a combination of diplomacy, law, and military strength. He saw himself as the heir to the Roman Caesars and aimed to bring back the glory of the empire by reinforcing central authority. To achieve this, he turned his attention to Italy, where the cities of the Lombard League had grown rich and independent. These cities, especially Milan, resisted imperial interference and sought self-rule. Frederick believed that allowing them too much autonomy would weaken imperial unity. His campaigns in Italy were driven by this conviction, but they would also expose the limits of his vision. In his first Italian expedition, Frederick asserted his power with impressive force. He received homage from cities and nobles and established his authority with symbolic ceremonies that reminded all of his divine mandate. Yet resistance soon surfaced. The city of Milan refused to submit fully to his rule, leading to a brutal conflict that would define much of his reign. His treatment of Milan was harsh. He ordered the city's destruction after a long siege, reducing it to ruins as a warning to others. This act, though it secured obedience for a time, also fueled resentment across northern Italy and set the stage for continued rebellion. The emperor's might could conquer, but it could not always inspire lasting loyalty. Frederick's relationship with the papacy was another defining feature of his rule. Popes during his reign, including Adrian IV and Alexander III, were wary of his growing influence. The Pope crowned him emperor in Rome, affirming his position as the secular leader of Christendom, but the alliance was fragile. Disputes over the boundaries of spiritual and imperial authority soon emerged. Frederick believed the emperor derived his power directly from God, not from the Pope. The papacy, however, insisted that all Christian rulers owed allegiance to the spiritual head of the Church. This disagreement led to years of political maneuvering, excommunications, and even open warfare. Despite these conflicts, Frederick's reign was not solely defined by conquest and dispute. He was also a reformer who sought to bring order and justice to his realm. One of his greatest achievements was the reorganization of imperial law. He worked to establish clearer systems of governance that reduced corruption and strengthened the rule of law. His court became a center of legal development and administration. He supported scholars, poets, and chroniclers who helped shape the intellectual life of his era. The emperor's charisma extended beyond the battlefield to the realm of ideas, where he cultivated an image of the just ruler, a man who embodied both strength and fairness. Frederick's personal qualities made him stand out among his contemporaries. He was known for his imposing physical presence and his distinctive red beard, which earned him the name Barbarossa, meaning red beard. His demeanor inspired both fear and admiration. Chroniclers described him as calm under pressure, decisive in battle, and generous to his followers. His ability to connect with his knights and subjects gave him a rare kind of authority. He could be severe when needed, but he also valued loyalty and rewarded service generously. These traits helped him maintain a strong following even during the most difficult periods of his rule. Throughout his reign, Frederick remained committed to the ideal of imperial unity, yet he faced continual challenges from within. The princes of Germany were fiercely protective of their privileges. The empire's structure made it difficult for any ruler to centralize power completely. Even as Frederick worked to bring order, he had to rely on negotiation and compromise. His leadership combined firmness with flexibility, allowing him to maintain influence in a system that resisted absolute control. His legacy in Germany was one of relative stability, where the emperor's presence reminded the princes of a higher authority, even if that authority was not always absolute. The later years of Frederick's reign saw his attention once again drawn to Italy. The formation of the Lombard League, an alliance of northern Italian cities supported by the Pope, challenged his dominance. In a decisive battle near Legnano, his forces suffered a rare defeat. This moment marked a turning point. It showed that even the great Barbarossa could not impose his will indefinitely. The Italian cities, determined and organized, had proven that they could resist imperial power. Following this setback, Frederick moved toward reconciliation. He signed the Peace of Constance, recognizing the autonomy of the Italian cities while retaining certain imperial rights. It was a pragmatic decision, showing his capacity for realism and compromise when absolute victory was unattainable. In his later years, Frederick continued to embody the image of a medieval emperor. He maintained order within his German territories, promoted legal reform, and preserved the dignity of his office. His influence extended beyond politics into culture and identity. The ideal of the strong, just ruler became associated with his name, shaping how future generations viewed monarchy and governance. His reputation as a warrior king and a lawgiver contributed to the legend that would outlive him. As the 12th century drew toward its close, the emperor's gaze turned to the Holy Land. The call for the Third Crusade had echoed across Europe, urging Christian rulers to reclaim Jerusalem after its fall. Frederick, despite his age, responded with characteristic determination. He saw the crusade not only as a spiritual duty, but also as an opportunity to reaffirm the empire's role as the defender of Christendom. Gathering a large army, he set out across Europe toward the east. His march demonstrated the continuing power of his leadership. Even after decades on the throne, he commanded respect and loyalty from nobles and knights who saw in him the embodiment of Christian kingship. The journey to the Holy Land, however, would not end as planned. In the heat of Asia Minor, while crossing a river, the emperor met his death. The circumstances remain partly uncertain, but it is believed that he drowned during the crossing. His sudden death shocked his followers and left the crusade leaderless. His army, disheartened, struggled to continue without him. The emperor's body was never properly brought back to his homeland, and his death became the subject of both sorrow and legend. Many believe that Barbarossa did not truly die, but slept in a hidden mountain cave, waiting for the day when Germany would need him again. This myth of the sleeping emperor reflects the deep impression he left on the imagination of his people. Frederick Barbarossa's reign represented the height of imperial ambition in medieval Europe. He sought to restore the ancient power of the Roman emperors while navigating the realities of a fragmented and evolving political landscape. His vision of a united empire ruled by law and guided by divine purpose inspired admiration, but also resistance. His conflicts with the papacy and the Italian cities revealed the limits of imperial authority in a changing world. Yet his achievements in governance, law, and leadership left a lasting mark. He strengthened the foundations of imperial administration and set examples that later rulers would follow. His legacy cannot be measured only by his victories or defeats. Barbarossa's true impact lies in how he shaped the idea of rulership. He embodied the belief that authority carried both responsibility and divine sanction. He understood that power, to endure, required not only force but also justice. His reign offered a model of balance between might and order, ambition and restraint. Although he could not fully realize his dream of imperial unity, his efforts helped to define the nature of the empire for generations to come. In the centuries after his death, Frederick Barbarossa became a symbol of national identity, particularly in Germany. Poets, historians, and political thinkers looked back to him as the ideal emperor who had combined courage, wisdom, and determination. During later periods of upheaval, his image was revived as a source of hope and unity. The legend of the red-bearded emperor sleeping beneath a mountain, ready to return in the nation's hour of need, reflected the enduring power of his name. His story bridged history and myth, linking the medieval past with the aspirations of later ages. Barbarossa's life also illustrates the broader transformation of Europe during the 12th century. It was an age when the concept of centralized rule was being tested, when monarchs across the continent sought to strengthen their authority amid growing urbanization and rising local powers. The emperor's struggles in Italy mirrored those of other rulers who faced the challenge of balancing traditional feudal structures with emerging civic independence. His reign marked a step toward the development of political order, law, and governance that would shape European civilization for centuries. At the same time, Barbarossa's story reflects the limits of individual power in the face of historical forces. His efforts to impose unity on a diverse empire encountered resistance from both secular and religious authorities. The papacy, the princes, and the cities each represented competing visions of authority. His reign showed that no single ruler could permanently dominate such a complex system. Yet his persistence and adaptability demonstrated the qualities that make leadership endure beyond circumstance. He combined military skill with statesmanship, faith with pragmatism, and ambition with a sense of destiny. The image of Frederick Barbarossa remains compelling not only because of what he achieved, but also because of what he represented. He was the archetype of the medieval emperor, straddling the line between earthly power and divine mission. His reign stood at the intersection of tradition and transformation, where the medieval order began to give way to the first hints of modern political consciousness. His pursuit of unity and justice, even when thwarted, speaks to the timeless struggle of rulers to reconcile idealism with reality. In remembering Barbarossa, one also recalls the world he sought to shape. The Holy Roman Empire of his day was a living mosaic of cultures, languages, and loyalties. Its vastness was both its strength and its weakness. It offered a vision of a Christian commonwealth bound by shared faith, but divided by local interests. Barbarossa's attempt to bring coherence to this world, though incomplete, was a defining moment in European history. It represented an effort to create order out of fragmentation, a challenge that would echo through the centuries. Even today, the name Barbarossa evokes a sense of awe and fascination. His story has inspired countless retellings in chronicles, literature, and legend. The red-bearded emperor stands as a reminder of the power of vision and the fragility of ambition. His reign illustrates how history is shaped by the character of those who lead and by the forces that lie beyond their control. In the end, Frederick Barbarossa's roar still echoes across time, not only as a symbol of might, but as a testament to the enduring human quest for unity, justice, and meaning in the face of a divided world. Frederick Barbarossa's reign was not only about holding an empire together, but also about shaping it into something greater than it had ever been. His rule carried a clear purpose: to forge an empire that could embody the unity, order, and majesty once seen in ancient Rome. Every decision he made, whether in battle or diplomacy, reflected this vision. He sought to create a structure of authority so strong and so enduring that no internal faction or external rival could tear it apart. His dream was not merely to rule, but to redefine what it meant to be emperor in a world divided by faith, power, and ambition. His pursuit of the imperial ideal would shape his every action, from the way he dealt with the papacy to the alliances he built and the wars he fought. Barbarossa viewed his empire as a sacred trust, a divine inheritance that demanded his full devotion. To him, the emperor was not just a political ruler, but the earthly reflection of God's order. This belief placed him on a collision course with the papacy, which claimed supremacy in spiritual matters and often extended that claim into the realm of temporal power. The long and complex struggle between empire and church had already defined much of Europe's political landscape before Frederick's reign, but under his leadership it reached new levels of confrontation. The popes of his time, Adrian IV and Alexander III, saw in him a ruler whose ambitions threatened to overshadow the church's influence. To Barbarossa, however, the empire's authority was God-given and could not be subordinate to the church. He respected religion deeply, but would not yield the independence of imperial power. This rivalry was more than a personal struggle. It was a contest of ideas about the structure of Christendom. The emperor envisioned a world where secular authority guided political life and ensured stability across Christian lands. The Pope, in turn, represented the belief that spiritual authority stood above all earthly rulers. Frederick's efforts to assert his vision brought him repeatedly into conflict with the papacy. He refused to accept any suggestion that his imperial title derived from the church's blessing rather than from divine ordination. The papacy, threatened by this stance, used excommunication as a weapon against him, hoping to weaken his legitimacy. Yet Frederick's resolve did not waver. He continued to pursue his policies with confidence that history and divine will stood on his side. At the heart of Barbarossa's vision was the re-establishment of imperial supremacy in Italy. The northern Italian city-states had grown wealthy and independent through trade and self-governance. They acknowledged the emperor in name, but often resisted his direct control. For Frederick, their defiance was more than rebellion. It was a challenge to the very foundation of imperial unity. His campaigns in Italy were not acts of mere conquest, but attempts to restore what he saw as the rightful order. Each journey south of the Alps was both a military expedition and a political statement. His goal was to reaffirm imperial sovereignty and remind all of his subjects, noble or common, clerical or lay, that the empire was indivisible. Barbarossa's first Italian expedition set the tone for his approach. He demanded formal recognition of his authority and insisted that the cities render him the services and taxes owed to the emperor. When Milan refused, he made an example of it. After a prolonged siege, he ordered its destruction, turning the proud city into rubble. This act shocked Europe and demonstrated that defiance would not be tolerated. To his supporters, it was proof of his strength. To his critics, it was evidence of his cruelty. Yet Frederick saw it as necessary to establish discipline within the empire. His methods, though harsh, reflected his belief that peace could only be maintained through respect for authority. The struggle for dominance in Italy continued throughout his reign. Each campaign revealed the delicate balance between power and diplomacy. The Italian cities, unwilling to surrender their independence, united under the Lombard League, a powerful coalition supported by the Pope. Frederick responded with force, believing that the fate of the empire depended on his success. His armies marched repeatedly across the Alps, facing not only human resistance, but also the challenges of disease, supply shortages, and the weariness of prolonged warfare. The emperor's determination, however, never faltered. He led his troops personally, earning admiration for his courage and endurance. His leadership inspired loyalty, even when circumstances seemed hopeless. One of the defining moments in his struggle with the Lombard League was the Battle of Legnano. Here, his army faced a united Italian force determined to defend its freedom. The battle was fierce and costly. Frederick fought bravely, but suffered a rare defeat. This setback marked a turning point in his Italian policy. The dream of absolute control gave way to a more pragmatic approach. Realizing that endless war could not bring lasting stability, he sought reconciliation. The Peace of Constance that followed granted the Italian cities significant autonomy while preserving key imperial rights. It was a compromise that allowed both sides to claim victory. For Barbarossa, it was also a lesson in the limits of power. His ability to negotiate peace after years of conflict showed his maturity as a ruler who could temper ambition with. While his campaigns in Italy defined much of his reign, Barbarossa's empire-building efforts extended far beyond the battlefield. He understood that lasting power required more than military might. Diplomacy, marriage, and alliance were essential tools in his quest for dominance. Throughout his reign, he engaged in a careful game of political strategy, forging connections that strengthened his position at home and abroad. His marriage to Beatrice of Burgundy was one of the most important alliances of his career. Through this union, he gained control over the rich and strategically significant region of Burgundy, expanding his influence westward and securing the empire's borders. Beatrice herself proved to be a capable and respected partner, admired for her intelligence and loyalty. Together, they projected an image of imperial stability and grandeur. Frederick also used his family ties to build bridges with powerful noble houses. By arranging marriages between his relatives and influential princes, he created a network of loyalties that reinforced his authority. He rewarded faithful allies with lands and titles, ensuring their support in times of conflict. His understanding of human motivation, ambition, pride, and honor allowed him to manage the complex hierarchy of medieval nobility with remarkable skill. He knew when to apply pressure and when to offer generosity, when to command and when to persuade. This blend of firmness and tact helped him maintain balance in an empire that could easily have descended into chaos. Diplomacy was equally vital in his dealings with foreign powers. Frederick sought to maintain stable relations with the kings of France and England while ensuring that the empire remained the dominant force in Central Europe. His correspondence and treaties show a ruler who was both confident in his authority and aware of the need for cooperation. He did not pursue expansion for its own sake, but for the sake of imperial order. His diplomacy extended to the papacy as well. Even amid conflict, he understood the symbolic importance of maintaining at least the appearance of Christian unity. His ability to navigate the fine line between confrontation and conciliation reflected his deep understanding of the political realities of his age. Barbarossa's imperial vision also relied on the reform and strengthening of internal governance. He worked to create a more consistent and reliable system of administration across his vast territories. His reforms aimed to reduce corruption, standardize justice, and reinforce the emperor's role as the ultimate guardian of law and order. By supporting legal scholars and codifying administrative practices, he helped lay the foundation for a more coherent imperial structure. His insistence on justice earned him respect among his subjects, who saw in him not only a warrior, but also a fair and principled ruler. The emperor's court became a symbol of disciplined governance and intellectual vitality. Frederick's belief in law and order extended to his personal conduct. He held himself to high standards of behavior, expecting the same from his nobles and officials. His leadership style combined discipline with accessibility. He was known to listen to petitions, arbitrate disputes, and reward merit. This sense of fairness strengthened his bond with his subjects. Even those who opposed his policies could not easily deny his integrity or his devotion to the empire's welfare. His reign represented a rare balance between authority and justice, a balance that many rulers before and after him struggled to achieve. The emperor's military career, though marked by both victories and defeats, left an undeniable impact on Europe. His campaigns were massive undertakings that required immense resources and coordination. They tested the empire's capacity to mobilize men and materials across vast distances. Each expedition, whether in Germany, Italy, or the East, demonstrated the scale of his ambition and the strength of his leadership. His armies carried the imperial banner as a symbol of unity and faith. To his followers, marching under his command was not merely a duty, but a sacred mission. His personal courage in battle, often leading from the front, inspired deep loyalty among his troops. Frederick's final great military venture, the Third Crusade, represented the culmination of his imperial ideals. The fall of Jerusalem to Muslim forces had shocked Christendom, and the call for a new crusade resounded across Europe. Barbarossa, now an older man but still full of vigor, answered that call with the same determination that had defined his life. For him, the crusade was both a religious obligation and a political opportunity. It allowed him to unite the princes of Europe under a common cause and to reaffirm the empire's spiritual leadership. His departure for the East was a grand spectacle, marked by solemn ceremonies and public devotion. The sight of the emperor leading his army on a journey of faith captured the imagination of his contemporaries. The crusade, however, was fraught with difficulties. The journey across the Balkans and through Asia Minor tested the endurance of his forces. Supply shortages, disease, and harsh terrain took a heavy toll. Yet Barbarossa remained steadfast, maintaining order and discipline among his men. His leadership kept the army united even as hardships mounted. His presence gave hope to all who marched under him. Many believed that with him at the helm, victory was assured. But fate intervened in a way no one could have foreseen. As the army prepared to advance deeper into enemy territory, the emperor drowned while crossing a river. His death was sudden and devastating. The army, struck by grief and confusion, faltered without its leader. What had begun as a journey of triumph ended in sorrow. The loss of Barbarossa marked not only the end of an emperor, but also the end of an era. His death left a void that no successor could easily fill. The empire he had struggled to strengthen remained intact, but lacked his unifying presence. Yet his influence endured. His reforms, his laws, and his vision continued to shape imperial governance. His example inspired future rulers who sought to uphold the dignity and authority of the empire. The legend that grew after his death, of the emperor sleeping beneath a mountain, waiting to return, reflected the deep sense of loss and longing his people felt. It also captured the enduring hope that his ideals might one day be fulfilled. Frederick Barbarossa's legacy rests on more than his conquests or his political achievements. It lies in the strength of his vision. He believed that an empire was more than a collection of territories. It was a moral and spiritual order guided by justice and faith. His relentless pursuit of unity, even when met with resistance, showed his unwavering conviction. He understood that authority required both power and legitimacy, both the sword and the law. His reign demonstrated the possibility of leadership that combined courage with wisdom, ambition with restraint. In many ways, Barbarossa's life mirrored the contradictions of the medieval world itself. He was both a man of war and a man of law, both a devout Christian and a pragmatic statesman. His dream of imperial supremacy over the Pope and the Italian cities reflected his belief in the natural harmony between divine and secular authority, even though history proved that such harmony was difficult to achieve. His marriages and alliances revealed his understanding of the human side of politics, the necessity of building trust and mutual interest. His military campaigns, whether in Lombardy or the East, showed the scope of his ambition and the depth of his courage. The memory of Barbarossa continued to shape European thought long after his passing. He became a symbol of the emperor as guardian of order and unity, a figure who stood above the petty rivalries of princes and the ambitions of the church. His image, immortalized in legend, spoke to a collective yearning for strength, justice, and continuity. In the centuries that followed, his name would be invoked by rulers seeking legitimacy, by poets seeking inspiration, and by nations seeking identity. The red-bearded emperor became more than a historical figure. He became an ideal, a vision of what leadership could be when guided by faith and purpose. Through his actions and his ideals, Frederick Barbarossa forged not only an empire, but a legacy that transcended his time. His life reminds us that history's greatest figures are those who strive to shape the world according to principles that endure beyond their own lifetimes. The roar of his ambition, the power of his vision, and the grandeur of his deeds continue to echo through the corridors of history. Though centuries have passed, the empire he sought to build and the ideals he embodied remain part of the enduring story of Europe, a story of unity, struggle, and the timeless pursuit of order in a divided world. The rivalry between Frederick Barbarossa and the papacy was one of the defining struggles of the 12th century, a contest that shaped not only his reign but the entire medieval understanding of power and authority. The conflict was not born out of personal hatred or ambition alone. It was the continuation of an old wound in European politics that had begun long before Barbarossa took the throne. The echoes of the investiture controversy still reverberated through the Holy Roman Empire and the Church, influencing every decision, alliance, and confrontation between crown and crozier. The controversy, which had torn apart Christendom in the previous century, centered on a single yet profound question: who held the ultimate right to appoint bishops and control the wealth and influence of the Church within the empire, the emperor or the pope? By the time Barbarossa ascended the throne, this question had evolved into a broader struggle over the nature of authority itself. The investiture controversy had been formally resolved through uneasy compromises, but the spirit of rivalry remained alive. The Church had gained moral and symbolic ascendancy under reforming popes who sought to free it from secular interference. Meanwhile, emperors still viewed themselves as divinely chosen rulers responsible for maintaining order in both temporal and spiritual matters. Frederick inherited this delicate balance, but unlike some of his predecessors, he was unwilling to yield to papal supremacy. He saw the emperor as the protector of the Christian world, not its subordinate. To him, the empire was ordained by God to uphold justice on earth, while the pope's role was to guide souls toward salvation. These were separate yet complementary missions, but the church under Alexander III saw no such division. The pope believed that all authority, spiritual and temporal, was ultimately subject to the will of the church, which represented the body of Christ on earth. This disagreement, deeply rooted in theology and politics, became the core of their confrontation. When Barbarossa was crowned emperor in Rome by Pope Adrian IV, the ceremony symbolized a brief moment of harmony between the two powers. Yet even during that solemn occasion, tensions simmered beneath the surface. Frederick believed that the act of coronation confirmed his independent status as emperor, while the Pope saw it as a reminder that imperial legitimacy derived from the Church's blessing. The fragile peace between them quickly unraveled. Disputes arose over protocol, recognition, and jurisdiction. The emperor's envoys, accustomed to deference, found themselves humiliated in Rome, and Frederick, proud and unyielding, saw this as an insult not only to himself but to the entire imperial institution. The seeds of open conflict were sown. Adrian's death brought a new and formidable figure to the papal throne, Alexander III. Educated, astute, and politically experienced, Alexander possessed the resolve and intellect to match Barbarossa's strength. His election, however, was contested by a rival faction supported by imperial loyalists who installed an antipope favorable to Frederick's interests. This act ignited one of the most intense confrontations between emperor and pope in medieval history. Barbarossa recognized the antipope as the legitimate pontiff, while Alexander refused to yield, declaring his election the only valid one. The divide plunged Christendom into a schism that lasted for nearly 2 decades. The emperor's insistence on influencing papal elections and the pope's determination to preserve ecclesiastical independence set the stage for a struggle that would test both their wills. Frederick's challenge to Alexander III was not simply about religion. It was a political necessity. Control over the papacy meant control over the narrative of divine legitimacy. In the medieval world, no ruler could afford to appear excommunicated or outside the Church's grace. Excommunication did not only threaten the emperor's soul, it undermined his authority among his subjects. The princes, bishops, and cities of the empire could interpret papal condemnation as a release from their oaths of loyalty. Barbarossa understood this danger well, yet he refused to submit. When Alexander excommunicated him, he responded with military force and diplomatic defiance. He sought to replace the pope's moral power with the might of the empire, believing that the sword of justice could balance the crozier of faith. The confrontation between Barbarossa and Alexander played out on multiple fronts: political, military, and symbolic. The emperor's Italian campaigns, which he launched to assert control over the northern cities, also served as a means to pressure the papacy. Rome itself became both a battlefield and a symbol of their dispute. Each side sought to claim continuity with the legacy of ancient Rome, one as the heir to Caesar's imperial authority, the other as the successor to St. Peter's spiritual primacy. The emperor's coronation, his use of Roman legal traditions, and his insistence on imperial supremacy were deliberate acts meant to remind the world that the empire was not subordinate to the Church, but its equal partner in Alexander III, however, proved to be an opponent of remarkable resilience. He relied less on armies than on diplomacy and alliances. While Frederick commanded legions of knights, Alexander wielded influence through persuasion, excommunication, and the moral authority of the Church. He forged alliances with the Lombard League and with foreign monarchs who feared the growing power of the empire. The Pope's strategy was not to defeat the emperor outright in battle, but to isolate him politically and spiritually. By uniting Frederick's enemies under the banner of Christian righteousness, Alexander turned the emperor's military might into a burden. Every campaign south of the Alps drained the empire's resources and deepened resentment among the Italian cities. The turning point came when Frederick's forces suffered a decisive defeat near Legnano at the hands of the Lombard League, supported by the Pope. The loss weakened his bargaining position and forced him to reconsider his strategy. Years of warfare had achieved little beyond destruction and exhaustion. The emperor, recognizing the futility of further conflict, sought peace with Alexander. Their eventual reconciliation, formalized through negotiation, was a complex mixture of concession and dignity. Barbarossa acknowledged Alexander as the true pope, while the pope, in turn, lifted the excommunication and recognized the emperor's title. It was a political truce rather than a spiritual victory for either side, but it brought temporary stability to a war-torn Europe. The meeting between Barbarossa and Alexander was filled with symbolism. The emperor, who had once sought to bend the papacy to his will, now approached the pope not as a defeated man, but as a pragmatic statesman. According to chroniclers, when the two met, Frederick humbled himself in a gesture of reconciliation, though accounts differ on the degree of submission. Some say he knelt before the pope as a sign of repentance. Others insist he bowed only out of courtesy. Whatever the truth, the act represented more than personal humility. It was a recognition that neither empire nor papacy could claim absolute authority without the other. Their coexistence, uneasy and imperfect, was the only path to preserving order in Christendom. This settlement, while ending their direct confrontation, did not resolve the deeper issue of how secular and ecclesiastical power could coexist. The struggle between emperor and pope continued to shape European politics for centuries. The balance of power shifted repeatedly, influenced by the personalities and ambitions of later rulers and pontiffs. Yet the framework of negotiation established during Barbarossa's reign became a lasting precedent. It taught future generations that neither the crown nor the church could dominate entirely. Both were bound by the necessity of mutual recognition. The idea that spiritual and temporal authority must coexist within defined limits would eventually evolve into the broader medieval understanding of dual sovereignty, the belief that God had ordained separate yet interdependent realms of governance. The long struggle between Barbarossa and Alexander III had profound consequences for both institutions. For the empire, it reinforced the principle that imperial authority was derived not from papal sanction but from election and divine right. The emperor remained a secular ruler with responsibilities distinct from those of the church. This separation, though subtle at first, laid the groundwork for later developments in political thought, where the concept of sovereignty would gradually shift from divine ordination to the consent of the governed. For the church, the conflict affirmed its spiritual supremacy and independence. The papacy emerged from the struggle with renewed prestige, having stood firm against the most powerful monarch of the age. Alexander's victory in moral terms strengthened the Church's position across Europe, allowing later popes to claim even greater authority in temporal affairs. Barbarossa's conflict with the papacy also had immediate effects within the empire. His long absence in Italy and his focus on papal affairs gave the German princes greater freedom to consolidate their own power. The emperor's need for their support in his Italian campaigns forced him to grant concessions that weakened central authority. While Frederick's personal presence commanded loyalty, the structure of the empire became more decentralized. The princes, bishops, and city leaders who had once looked to the emperor as the supreme arbiter began to see themselves as semi-independent rulers within their own territories. This trend, though not fully visible during Barbarossa's lifetime, would grow stronger in the centuries that followed, shaping the political map of Europe. Despite these challenges, Barbarossa's image among his contemporaries remained largely positive. His charisma, fairness, and devotion to the empire won him admiration even from those who opposed him. Many saw in him the embodiment of the ideal ruler, strong, just, and guided by divine purpose. His struggle with the papacy was viewed not as rebellion against the church, but as defense of the rightful order of Christendom. To his supporters, he was the protector of the faith, ensuring that the church did not overstep its spiritual boundaries. To his critics, he was a warning of the dangers of pride and ambition. Both views capture elements of truth, for Frederick's greatness lay precisely in his complexity. He was a man of faith who challenged religious authority, a builder of law who waged relentless wars, a visionary who faced the limits of human power. The long-term legacy of Barbarossa's confrontation with the papacy can be traced in the evolving relationship between church and state in Europe. The medieval synthesis that emerged after his reign sought to balance spiritual and temporal authority. Kings continued to claim divine right, but they also recognized the moral authority of the church. Popes continued to assert supremacy, but they increasingly relied on diplomacy rather than direct confrontation. The uneasy cooperation between these two forces shaped the institutions of medieval Europe, from universities that blended theology and law to courts that invoked both canon and civil principles. The world that followed Barbarossa was one where power had to be justified not only by force but by reason and legitimacy. In the broader history of European thought, the clash between empire and papacy during Barbarossa's reign helped to define the boundaries between sacred and secular life. It forced thinkers, clerics, and jurists to articulate theories of governance that accounted for both divine will and human law. The emperor's insistence on his independence laid the foundation for later arguments about the autonomy of political authority. The Pope's defense of spiritual supremacy preserved the Church's role as the moral conscience of society. Out of their conflict arose the intellectual tension that would eventually lead to the Renaissance and, centuries later, to the modern idea of the state. The legacy of this struggle can still be seen in the way Europe developed its institutions. The separation between church and state that became a hallmark of modern governance had its distant origins in the confrontations of the 12th century. Barbarossa's defiance of papal control, though rooted in medieval notions of divine kingship, anticipated later movements toward secular sovereignty. The papacy's insistence on moral authority over kings anticipated the later role of religion as a guiding force in ethical and cultural life, rather than as a direct instrument of political power. The balance between these forces, one representing order, the other conscience, became the foundation of Western political thought. For Barbarossa personally, the struggle with the papacy tested every aspect of his leadership. It forced him to confront not only his external enemies, but also his own sense of purpose. He began his reign with the conviction that the emperor was the supreme guardian of Christendom, only to discover that true authority required compromise and humility. His final reconciliation with Alexander III showed the maturity of a ruler who understood that peace sometimes demanded restraint. It was not submission but wisdom that guided him in his later years. By recognizing the limits of imperial power, he preserved the dignity of the crown and ensured that the empire would endure beyond his lifetime. When historians look back on Frederick Barbarossa's reign, they often see in it the last great flowering of the medieval imperial ideal, a vision of unity that sought to harmonize faith and reason, church and state, heaven and earth. His conflict with the papacy was the crucible in which that vision was tested. The lessons drawn from it, about power, justice, and the human capacity for both pride and reconciliation, resonate long after the red-bearded emperor's death. His story is not merely a chapter in the history of the Middle Ages. It is a reflection of the eternal struggle between conscience and authority, between the need for order and the longing for freedom. In the centuries that followed, the legend of Barbarossa sleeping beneath the mountain became a powerful metaphor. It suggested that the ideals he fought for, unity, justice, and strength, had not perished but awaited renewal. His confrontation with Alexander III became a symbol of Europe's enduring quest to balance power with principle. Though their battles ended long ago, the questions they raised about the relationship between the spiritual and the temporal continue to shape the modern world. Frederick Barbarossa, the emperor who challenged the papacy and sought to forge divine order on earth, remains a figure through whom history speaks, reminding us that the greatest struggles are not only for territory or crowns, but for the soul of civilization itself. After years of conflict with the papacy and the long campaigns in Italy, Frederick Barbarossa turned his attention once again to the German heart of his empire. The trials of war, diplomacy, and reconciliation had given him not only experience but also perspective. He had seen the fragility of power when stretched too thin and the danger of neglecting the homeland for ambitions abroad. Having faced the limits of imperial authority in Italy and the firm resistance of the Church, Barbarossa now sought to consolidate his rule at home. His focus shifted from conquest to construction, from the assertion of power to its organization. The Germany he inherited was vast, diverse, and restless. To forge it into a cohesive realm required more than might. It demanded order, law, and vision. It was in this phase of his reign that Frederick revealed himself not only as a warrior and diplomat, but also as a builder of institutions, a reformer whose influence reached far beyond his lifetime. The Holy Roman Empire in the 12th century was less a single nation than a loose confederation of duchies, counties, and bishoprics. Its unity depended largely on the strength and prestige of the emperor. The princes of the realm, both secular and ecclesiastical, wielded immense power in their own territories. They were often more concerned with local interests than with imperial policy. The emperor's authority was recognized in principle but not always obeyed in practice. For an emperor to rule effectively, he had to balance firmness with persuasion, ensuring that the prince's loyalty was maintained not by force alone, but by respect for a common order. Barbarossa understood this delicate balance better than most of his predecessors. His experience dealing with the Italian cities and the papacy had taught him the importance of structure and law in maintaining authority. His first task was to strengthen the foundations of governance in Germany. After returning from his campaigns, he worked systematically to reassert imperial influence over the great duchies that formed the backbone of the realm. The duchies of Saxony, Bavaria, Swabia, and Franconia had long histories of independence and rivalry. Each had its own powerful ruler with ambitions that often conflicted with imperial interests. Barbarossa sought to bring these territories more firmly under his control through a mix of diplomacy, strategic marriage, and, when necessary, decisive action. He did not seek to destroy the autonomy of the princes, but to align their power with the goals of the empire. One of the most significant challenges he faced came from within the empire itself: the rebellion of Henry the Lion, Duke of Saxony and Bavaria. Henry was a member of the powerful Welf family, related to Barbarossa by blood, but often at odds with him politically. Henry had played an important role in the early years of Frederick's reign, supporting him in his Italian expeditions. Over time, however, his growing power and ambition began to threaten the balance of authority within the empire. When Henry refused to provide military assistance for the emperor's campaigns, Barbarossa interpreted it as an act of disobedience. The emperor moved swiftly to curtail his influence. Through a series of legal proceedings and political maneuvers, Henry was stripped of his titles and lands, which were then redistributed among loyal nobles. This event sent a clear message to the princes: loyalty to the emperor was not optional. Barbarossa's handling of the crisis demonstrated his ability to combine legality with authority, using the machinery of imperial law rather than mere force to enforce his will. This emphasis on law and order was central to Barbarossa's vision of governance. He understood that power rooted only in military strength could not endure, but power grounded in law could create stability that outlasted any single ruler. He therefore undertook significant reforms aimed at modernizing the empire's administration and legal system. He promoted the development of written law and the codification of legal principles that had previously existed only in custom or local tradition. Under his reign, the concept of imperial law began to take shape as a distinct and respected system, separate from both ecclesiastical law and local feudal practices. His efforts reflected not only his political pragmatism, but also his admiration for the revived study of Roman law, which was flourishing in the universities of Italy. Barbarossa's court became a center of legal thought and practice. He gathered jurists, scholars, and clerics who helped refine the procedures of imperial justice. He established clearer boundaries between the jurisdictions of the emperor, the princes, and the church, reducing the confusion that had often led to disputes. Imperial courts were strengthened, and new offices were created to ensure that laws were enforced consistently across the empire. This administrative renewal brought greater cohesion to the German lands and reinforced the emperor's role as the ultimate guardian of justice. His reign marked the beginning of a more systematic approach to governance that would influence later European monarchies. The emperor's legal reforms were closely tied to his broader efforts to centralize authority. He sought to make the empire not merely a collection of territories, but a political organism bound by shared institutions and mutual obligation. His use of charters and formal decrees standardized relationships between the crown and its vassals. By insisting on documented agreements rather than oral pledges, he introduced a new level of accountability. This reliance on record-keeping and written communication strengthened the bureaucracy of the empire. The imperial chancery, responsible for drafting and preserving official documents, grew in importance under his rule. Through this administrative precision, Barbarossa could manage a realm that stretched across vast distances and diverse cultures. Yet Frederick's reforms were not purely bureaucratic. They were moral and cultural as well. He saw governance as a reflection of divine order, where justice and duty formed the foundation of society. The emperor was not only the ruler but the exemplar of virtue, whose conduct set the tone for his subjects. His emphasis on chivalry, honor, and service reflected this ideal. The age of Barbarossa witnessed the rise of the knightly code, blending martial skill with moral discipline. Knights were expected not only to fight bravely, but to act with loyalty, fairness, and reverence for the sacred. This cultural evolution was deeply tied to Frederick's image as the ideal Christian ruler, a monarch who combined strength with righteousness. Under his patronage, the German lands experienced a period of remarkable cultural flourishing. The imperial court became a center of art, poetry, and intellectual activity. Frederick encouraged the use of both Latin and the vernacular in literary expression, fostering a sense of shared cultural identity among his people. Minzingers, the German lyric poets of the time, found support at noble courts that emulated the imperial example. Their songs celebrated love, honor, and courage, the very virtues that Barbarossa embodied. This cultural vitality helped to bind the empire together through shared ideals rather than mere political structure. Architecture and art also flourished under his reign. Romanesque cathedrals and monasteries rose across Germany, their massive stone structures symbolizing the permanence and strength of the empire. These buildings were not only places of worship, but also manifestations of the imperial vision, a union of faith and order. Monastic communities, often supported by imperial patronage, became centers of learning, manuscript production, and charitable work. They played a vital role in preserving knowledge and shaping moral life within the empire. The emperor's relationship with the church, though strained at times on the political level, remained grounded in a shared belief in Christian civilization. He viewed his duty as one of stewardship, ensuring that both the spiritual and material needs of his people were met. Barbarossa's administrative and legal reforms also had economic consequences. The growing order within the empire encouraged trade, agriculture, and urban development. Markets expanded, roads were improved, and towns gained prominence as centers of commerce. The emperor granted privileges to many cities, encouraging them to develop under imperial protection. These charters often guaranteed rights of trade, self-government, and legal autonomy in exchange for loyalty and taxes. By recognizing and regulating urban growth, Frederick ensured that prosperity supported, rather than threatened, imperial authority. The rise of towns under his reign represented a shift in the economic foundation of the empire, as wealth increasingly came from commerce rather than purely feudal estates. This combination of legal order, economic growth, and cultural renewal gave the German realm a new sense of stability and confidence. Barbarossa's rule created a model of governance that balanced tradition with innovation. His vision of the empire as a unified yet diverse community found expression in every aspect of his policy, from his dealings with princes to his patronage of learning. His approach was pragmatic, yet guided by an ideal of justice that transcended his own time. The emperor's reforms did not simply impose order, they cultivated it. They encouraged cooperation among the many elements of the empire, reminding nobles and towns alike that their prosperity depended on the maintenance of peace and law. Barbarossa's efforts to centralize authority did not go unchallenged. Some princes resented his growing control, fearing that his legal and administrative measures threatened their autonomy. Yet Frederick managed to maintain their loyalty through a careful balance of reward and respect. He understood the importance of ceremony and symbolism in medieval politics. The imperial diet, or assembly, became a crucial institution under his rule, providing a forum where princes could express their views while reaffirming their allegiance. These gatherings were not only political meetings, but also displays of unity, where the emperor's majesty reminded all participants of the sacred bond that held the empire together. His reign also strengthened the ideal of the empire itself as a distinct political and moral entity. To his contemporaries, the empire was more than a collection of lands. It was the earthly reflection of divine order. Barbarossa's reforms gave this idea tangible form. His emphasis on law, justice, and duty provided the empire with a sense of purpose beyond personal ambition. He saw himself as a custodian of civilization, responsible for maintaining harmony between power and righteousness. This belief guided his actions and gave his policies coherence. Even his conflicts with the church, viewed in this light, appear as part of his broader effort to define the proper relationship between authority and conscience. In cultural terms, the era of Barbarossa marked a turning point for German identity. His court and policies fostered a growing sense of belonging among the people of the empire. Literature, art, and law all contributed to this emerging consciousness. The songs of chivalry and the chronicles of his reign celebrated not only the emperor himself, but the idea of the German realm as a unified and noble civilization. The imperial eagle, long a symbol of authority, came to represent this shared heritage. In every cathedral built, in every poem written, the spirit of Barbarossa's empire was reflected, a world striving for balance between faith and reason, strength and justice, order and freedom. His emphasis on education and learning also left a lasting mark. The emperor supported schools and scholars, recognizing that knowledge was a pillar of good governance. Monastic scriptoria continued to produce illuminated manuscripts, while the influence of Italian universities began to reach northward. The revival of Roman law, which fascinated Barbarossa, inspired generations of jurists who would continue to refine the legal systems of Europe. His patronage of intellectual life ensured that the empire remained connected to the broader currents of medieval thought. As the years passed, Barbarossa's reforms bore fruit. The German territories became more stable and prosperous. The authority of the emperor, though not absolute, was respected as the cornerstone of unity. His rule created a lasting framework that endured even after his death. When he embarked on the crusade that would claim his life, he left behind an empire that was stronger and more coherent than when he had found it. His governance had transformed the Holy Roman Empire from a fragile federation into a political structure capable of enduring the challenges of time. The enduring significance of Barbarossa's reforms lies in their synthesis of power and principle. He proved that strength alone could not sustain an empire, but neither could ideals flourish without authority. His legal and administrative innovations gave substance to the concept of empire, while his cultural patronage gave it soul. The German heartlands, once divided by local rivalries, became the engine of imperial stability. The emperor's efforts to centralize authority without crushing local vitality reflected a wisdom rare for his age. He recognized that diversity, managed wisely, could be a source of strength rather than weakness. Frederick's legacy as a reformer is as profound as his fame as a warrior. His laws continued to influence imperial administration for centuries. His vision of justice inspired later generations of rulers who sought to balance power with morality. The cultural renaissance that flourished under his rule enriched European civilization, blending the ideals of chivalry, scholarship, and faith. The image of Barbarossa as both a stern ruler and a patron of the arts captured the essence of his reign, a period of strength tempered by grace, of ambition guided by intellect. When viewed in the broader scope of history, Barbarossa's focus on the German core of his empire can be seen as the foundation upon which later emperors would build. His reforms did not merely respond to the challenges of his time, they anticipated the needs of future generations. The systems he put in place, legal, administrative, and cultural, created a legacy that endured through centuries of change. His reign stands as a testament to the power of vision shaped by experience, of authority refined by wisdom. In the memory of his people, Frederick Barbarossa became not only the red-bearded emperor of legend, but the architect of a more ordered and enlightened realm. His work in Germany, following years of conflict and struggle, revealed the depth of his understanding of leadership. He had learned that true strength lay not in conquest but in creation, not in commanding obedience through fear, but in earning respect through justice. His empire, strengthened by reform and enriched by culture, stood as a living embodiment of his ideals. The spirit of renewal that defined his final years continued to echo long after his passing, as the German lands he had unified and reformed carried forward his vision of balance, order, and enduring majesty. The closing years of Frederick Barbarossa's life were shaped by both the weight of his past achievements and the unyielding demands of faith, ambition, and destiny. After decades of reform, warfare, and diplomacy, the emperor who had brought order to the German heartlands and imposed structure on the chaotic politics of Europe turned his gaze once more toward the east. His empire was now stable, his authority unquestioned, and his reputation as one of the greatest rulers of his age secure. Yet the ideals that had guided him throughout his reign, duty, honor, and divine purpose, would not let him rest. When word reached Europe that Jerusalem had once again fallen under Muslim control, Frederick, ever the knight as much as the sovereign, resolved to take up the cross. The crusade was both a test of faith and a call to glory, and for Barbarossa, it represented the ultimate fulfillment of his role as protector of Christendom. The Third Crusade was not merely a political venture. It was a sacred mission that demanded the greatest leaders of the age to unite. Alongside Frederick, two other monarchs, Richard of England and Philip of France, were drawn into the effort to reclaim the Holy Land. Yet even before they set out, the vast scope of the campaign tested the resolve and organization of all involved. For Barbarossa, who had spent his life managing the complexities of empire, the challenge was monumental, but not unfamiliar. His years of administration had given him the discipline to plan with precision. His authority commanded the loyalty of countless knights and nobles who saw in him the ideal Christian ruler. When he called for support, the response was overwhelming. Thousands answered his summons, gathering from every corner of the Holy Roman Empire to march under his banner. The emperor's decision to lead the crusade in person was a powerful statement. At an age when most rulers would have sought rest or delegation, he chose once again to bear the burdens of command. To his subjects, his participation was an act of faith and courage. To his enemies, a reminder that even in his later years, the lion of the empire remained formidable. His preparations were thorough, his intentions clear: to lead his army across Europe, through the lands of Byzantium, and into the heart of the Holy Land to confront the armies of Saladin. The journey that followed was as much a spiritual pilgrimage as a military expedition. It demanded endurance, faith, and unity among men who came from diverse regions and languages but were bound by a common cause. The army moved through Hungary and the Balkans, its discipline reflecting the emperor's experience. The Byzantine Empire, wary of so large and powerful a force crossing its territories, watched closely. Relations were tense, but ultimately managed with diplomacy. Barbarossa's command ensured that the Crusaders respected local populations and maintained order. His leadership combined firmness with justice, the same qualities that had defined his rule in Germany. Yet as the army pressed deeper into unfamiliar lands, new challenges arose. The terrain grew harsh, the heat oppressive, and supplies more difficult to secure. Many who had joined with enthusiasm began to falter. Still, the emperor's resolve never wavered. His presence inspired those around him, his endurance setting the example of the true crusader spirit. It was in Asia Minor that fate took its cruelest turn. After months of marching and battle, the imperial army reached the rugged landscapes of Cilicia. The campaign had already tested every ounce of their strength, but the sight of the mountains ahead renewed their hope. They were closer to their goal than ever before. Then tragedy struck. As the emperor attempted to cross a river, accounts differ as to whether he sought to cool himself, to test the depth, or to lead his men. He was swept away by the current. The shock was immediate and devastating. The man who had survived decades of war, rebellion, and political turmoil met his end not on the battlefield, but in the silent depths of a foreign river. News of Barbarossa's death spread swiftly through the camp and then across Europe. The impact was profound. Soldiers who had followed him with unshakable loyalty were overcome with grief and disbelief. Many could not accept that their emperor, the embodiment of strength and endurance, had perished in such a manner. Some chronicles say that the army, deprived of its leader, lost its spirit and unity. Without Barbarossa's guiding hand, discipline faltered and morale crumbled. The crusade, though continued by others, never regained its full momentum. The emperor's death marked not only the end of a campaign, but the passing of an era. In the aftermath, attempts were made to preserve his body so that it could be buried in the Holy Land, but the journey was long and the climate unforgiving. Parts of his remains were interred in different places along the way, his bones in one church, his flesh in another, each location a testament to the far reach of his final voyage. To many, this scattering of his body symbolized the vastness of his influence, a ruler whose presence touched every corner of the world he sought to unite. Yet for his people, the loss was immeasurable. Frederick Barbarossa was not merely a king. He was the living embodiment of imperial order, justice, and dignity. His passing left a void that no successor could easily fill. The legend that followed his death began almost immediately. Medieval Europe, ever drawn to tales of heroism and mystery, could not accept that such a figure had simply vanished from history. Stories arose that Barbarossa had not truly died, but had entered a deep sleep, hidden within the heart of a mountain, awaiting the day when his empire would once again need him. According to the most enduring version of the legend, he lies beneath the Kefauver mountain in Thuringia, his red beard grown long enough to wind around the stone table at which he rests. It is said that he will awaken when the ravens cease to fly around the mountain, rising once more to restore Germany to unity and greatness. This myth, blending hope with nostalgia, captured the imagination of generations. To the people of later centuries, especially in times of division or crisis, the figure of the sleeping emperor became a symbol of national renewal. The legend spoke to the deep yearning for order and strength that Barbarossa had once embodied. He was no longer just a historical ruler, but a timeless guardian of the German spirit. The Kefauver myth was not unique in European folklore. Many cultures have legends of sleeping heroes who will return in the hour of need. But in Barbarossa's case, the story resonated deeply with the political and cultural identity of the German people. It transformed him from a medieval monarch into a symbol of unity, continuity, and hope. Through art, literature, and oral tradition, the legend of Barbarossa continued to grow. Poets and chroniclers depicted him as the ideal ruler who would one day return to bring justice and peace. The image of the emperor sleeping beneath the mountain became a motif of endurance and faith in renewal. In later centuries, especially during the rise of national consciousness, the story gained renewed significance. Painters portrayed him surrounded by knights in slumber, awaiting the divine signal to rise again. The legend's endurance shows how deeply his reign had impressed itself upon the collective memory of his people. It was not only his achievements that were remembered, but the spirit he represented, a vision of an ordered, unified realm governed by strength tempered with wisdom. Yet beyond the myth lies the more complex truth of his legacy. Frederick Barbarossa's reign stands as one of the most remarkable in medieval Europe, but it also raises enduring questions about the nature of power and unity. Did he truly create a lasting empire, or did he merely postpone its inevitable fragmentation? His reforms in law, administration, and culture had strengthened the foundations of imperial authority, but after his death, those foundations were tested by the realities of feudal politics and human ambition. His successors inherited a realm more stable than before, yet they lacked his commanding presence and skill. The delicate balance he had maintained between emperor, princes, and church proved difficult to sustain. The Holy Roman Empire remained a complex and often divided entity. The autonomy of the princes, though curtailed under Barbarossa, persisted as a defining feature of German politics. Local interests often overshadowed imperial unity. The very strength of regional institutions, which Frederick had respected as part of his pragmatic approach, made absolute centralization impossible. His vision of empire had depended on his personal authority and charisma, qualities that could not be inherited. When he was gone, the cohesion he had enforced through law and leadership began to loosen. Yet to say that he failed to create unity would be an oversimplification. His achievements laid the groundwork for an enduring political and cultural identity that survived long after the empire's structures shifted and evolved. Barbarossa's true legacy lies in the transformation he brought to the idea of empire itself. He redefined the relationship between the ruler and the ruled, between law and power, between the temporal and the spiritual. His reign established the principle that imperial authority was not arbitrary, but grounded in justice and divine order. Even when his successors struggled to maintain the same level of control, the ideals he championed continued to shape the ethos of governance in the German lands. The legal and administrative frameworks he introduced endured, influencing not only later emperors, but also the broader development of European political thought. Culturally, his era marked a high point of medieval civilization in Germany. The arts, architecture, and literature that flourished under his patronage helped to define a distinctly German contribution to the culture of Christendom. The chivalric ideals he embodied inspired generations of knights and poets. The Romanesque cathedrals that rose during his reign stood as monuments not only to faith, but to the enduring order he sought to create. These achievements could not be undone by the passage of time. Even as the empire evolved, the memory of Barbarossa's reign remained a touchstone for later rulers who sought legitimacy and inspiration. In the centuries that followed, historians, theologians, and poets alike look back to Barbarossa as a figure of both awe and contemplation. His reign was seen as a model of balance, between might and mercy, tradition and innovation, ambition and duty. Some viewed him as the last true emperor of the medieval ideal, a ruler who genuinely embodied the harmony of power and justice. Others saw in his story a warning about the limits of human authority and the fragility of order in a world shaped by competing forces. The tragedy of his death, so sudden and seemingly meaningless, gave his story a moral weight that deepened its resonance. It reminded future generations that even the greatest of rulers are subject to fate, and that the endurance of their work depends on the strength of the principles they leave behind. The legend of the sleeping emperor can thus be seen not only as a tale of hope, but as a reflection of this truth. The mountain beneath which he rests is not merely a symbol of waiting, but of preservation. The preservation of an ideal that outlives the man who conceived it. Every generation that has retold the story has, in its own way, renewed the values he stood for, justice, unity, and faith in the enduring order of the world. His presence in the national imagination has shifted over time, from medieval hero to symbol of national unity, but his essence remains constant. He is the emperor who dreamed of harmony between heaven and earth, between ruler and subject, between faith and reason. In the broader context of European history, Barbarossa's influence extends beyond his empire. His reign marked a stage in the evolution of monarchy, law, and governance that shaped the political landscape of the continent. His engagement with the papacy defined the boundaries between spiritual and temporal power for centuries to come. His emphasis on legal order contributed to the gradual emergence of a more structured and accountable form of rule. His cultural patronage helped to integrate the German lands into the intellectual and artistic currents of medieval Europe. In every aspect, his reign represented the maturity of the medieval world before the transformations that would follow in later centuries. As history moved forward, the figure of Barbarossa remained a mirror for changing times. During the Age of Romanticism, poets and thinkers revived his image as the idealized ruler of a golden past. In times of national division, he became a symbol of unity and strength. Even in the modern era, his name evokes both admiration and reflection. He represents the timeless struggle to reconcile ambition with principle, to wield power without succumbing to its corruption, to create order in a world of chaos. The fact that his story continues to be told, that his image remains vivid after so many centuries, is itself a measure of his enduring significance. Frederick Barbarossa's life was a tapestry woven from the threads of ambition, faith, and destiny. His death, tragic and unexpected, transformed him from a ruler of men into a figure of legend. Yet it is in the blend of history and myth that his true legacy lies. He was both a man of his time and a symbol for all time, a ruler whose vision outlasted his empire, whose memory became a touchstone for generations seeking meaning in the past. The red-bearded emperor who once sought to unite the world under law and faith continues to rest, in story if not in truth, beneath the mountain that bears his legend. And as long as the ravens still circle above, his people continue to believe that one day he will awaken, not to reclaim his throne, but to remind them of the eternal power of justice, courage, and unity.